All right.
I go?
Go for it.
Okay. Abba Father Yahweh, Zebaot, thank you so much for this time of your Moed, 7 MUODYM. Thank you for this beautiful day, another day to praise and think about you and your Paleo-Hebrew Debarim written on our hearts and minds and souls. Thank you for giving us the vitality in our nefesh and in our eyes on you and everything that you have set before us and you have provided for us, filled to the brim, overflowing, bubbling to the top. Amen. Thank you for Eric's teaching today. Thank you for his brilliant, beautiful mind. Thank you for all your people, your Ayin Mem, the fruit of the womb. Thank you for your 7th-day Shabbat. Thank you for your beautiful Torah, Ikra Kadosh, Pesach, and Chag Hamatzot. Amen. Woo!
Amen. You know, Nicholas said a thing there, the fruit of the womb, your people. And I would imagine that most people would say, well, that's just kind of poetic. It's true, but it's kind of poetic. But see, if you know the language, you realize that the word people is ayin mem. And ayin is drawn like an eyeball, a circle with a dot, pupil in the eye, but it's also the seed in a piece of fruit. And mem, though mem means water, it's used as in the, you might say the Mishkan pattern, as a womb, place where the seed is planted. So to look at ayin mem and say, well, that's fruit and womb, fruit of the womb, that's your people. That's part of the story. There's more to it than that. But the idea is that a simple little phrase like people, fruit of the womb, what's the connection? And that act of, you might say intellectually or thinking, pondering, considering the connection is the nature of this study. So today is the letter DALET of Psalms 119. And just to give a perspective, back in 2011, did the class called the eriktology class, which was 1 letter per week with a few extra things thrown in. It ended up being pretty close to 60 hours long. We're going to do the same thing with this study here on Psalms 119. So every 8 verses is the next letter in the ALEF-BEIT. So that's 22 weeks right there. And what I had done in the eriktology class is have 3 what I called selahs. Selah, Samik, Lamed, Hey means stop and think about it. So you might say there's a natural break between Zion means to cut off. It's the 7th letter, and 8 is a fence. Well, that's another barrier. So there's these 2 barriers, as it were. You might say between 7 and 8, between Zion and Chet. So that's where the first Selah was. Am I still on?
Yes.
My phone's acting up. It trying to advertise stuff. Okay, so anyway, if you look at the Mishkan, there was a big white fence. That's the Chet. And then there was a barbecue grill and a laver, a wash basin. And then there was a covered place. Well, that covered place had some kind of a door or a veil to push through and get inside. So that's another barrier. That would be between the Nun and the Samik. If Mem and Nun line up with the laver, Samik being the menorah, that was inside. So between Nun and Samik was the second Selah. And then there was a veil separating the altar of incense from the Ark of the Covenant, and that would be between Pei and Zadi. So that was the third Selah. So I'll duplicate that this time. And just for reference, to stop and think about it and address what is, if you're standing right outside the tet, you might say, I will discuss at length the concept of the Mishkan pattern at that time for that week. That's what's right in front. But because every letter is part of a whole collective, the only way to address each letter is to address the letters around it, and the letters around it being part of the bigger scope, you kind of have to address all of them at the same time. And the problem, like you might say with the eriktology class at the very beginning, that was back in 2011, and nobody knows it. I mean, even now, maybe if somebody's new to this study, you don't even know what the alphabet is, nor why I would call it ALEF-BEIT. If it's alpha, well, alpha, that's Greek. Alpha, beta, that's Greek. Alphabet, ALEF-BEIT, bet. I mean, you have to get strange words into your mind, which are new. And so what I had done at the eriktology class was I gave an introduction to begin with, because if you start incrementally, this is Aleph, this is Bet, and if you have no idea where it's going, then you're totally lost. So you have to give an overview, and then you can talk about the individual things, and then you can go back to the overview in light of the individual things, and that's really the only way to get it. So I tried to do a preliminary of this, and as a matter of fact, since last fall, probably a few months, I've been trying to do various other talks, setting up this consciousness so that I wouldn't have to keep addressing the basics, the preliminaries, for the sake of talking about the individual letters. So with that in mind, this is the DALET, the fourth letter, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, DALET. And then the next letters are Hey, Vav, and Zion. And that makes a total of 7. And why 7? Well, 7 is the perfect number, the heavenly number. Why is that? The word 7, Shin Bet Ayin, means to swear a vow, or to get cursed if you don't keep the vow. Okay, what has that got to do with anything? Well, that's all part of the study. We'll get into that more on the 7th letter. But DALET is a door. I'm sitting here in front of a pretty nondescript door. Sitting outside looking towards the inside, or I could be inside looking towards the outside. A door is simply a convenient option to be either here or there. So if somebody shows you the door, does that mean they're telling you get out of here, or that's saying you can leave if you want to? So there's a very serious consideration that we'll bump into in the second hour. One of them is John 10, verses 9 to 16, where YHUH says, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. So that's not metaphor, that's a statement. And if I take that as a fact, I can expect salvation if I enter through Jesus Christ, who said those words. But as soon as I say that sentence, well, I know who I am because I have my own consciousness. I can enter. What does that mean? By him. Who is him? Is he the Jesus Christ, JC, God-man, or is he YHUH, the Mashiach? Is he different? What does it mean to enter? When he said he's the door, what does that mean? And what does it mean to be saved? Does it mean you get to have eternal life? Does it mean he said in John 14:6, that's the other verse of consideration, no one can enter the Father's house except through me. Okay, but what's the Father's house? And what does it mean to enter the Father's house? And what does it mean to be through? I mean, we can't elbow him out of the way and get past him like the football scrimmage line. Get through the line of the defenders, and you can run down the field and make a touchdown. And I was like, what does he mean through me? The Greek, the letter is a prefix that is the letter bet, means in, on, with, among, through, and against. And it's like, well, how do you tell the difference between whether it's with or against? And again, that's where what's called the nikud, the modern Hebrew vowels, are lines and dots that are placed underneath the spelling of words. And because of the vowel pronunciation, A, E, I, O, U, or Y in English, you know whether it's with or against. There's no mistaking it. But in the Paleo, there's no vowel dots. And so I try to take both or all the possible meanings into consideration, regardless of how it might have vowels. Is it Kiddush? Is it Kadosh? Is it Kodesh? Is it Kadash? Kadasha? It's like, it's Kuf Dalet Shin, or maybe Kuf Dalet Vav Shin. Kuf Dalet Yod Shin. What I'm saying is if Yods and Vavs can be dropped in between other letters as if they were wild cards, and sometimes you can drop in a Tav and sometimes even an Aleph. Usually a Tav acts like a wild card if it's dropped in between the letters also. But that's just getting to know the language. So the basic essence of it is that you have to look at each individual letter as a concept, as an issue, as a statement of having some effect on the word, but it's placed in the alphabetic sequence. Dalet in this case is word letter number 4. So it's a letter, yes, Dalet's the name of the letter, but it's also a word. So you look up in the dictionary, and Dalet is spelled with 3 letters, Dalet, Lamed, Tav. But Tav is a suffix, meaning it's not really part of the word. The real word is just simply Dalet Lamed, or Dalet Lamed Hey, or Dalet Lamed Lamed. Sometimes you can put a Vav in between the second and third letter and make it Dalet Lamed Vav Lamed, or Dalet Lamed Yod Lamed. And if you look in the dictionary, not every time, but you'll see quite often those are the derivative spellings. They pretty much mean the same thing, only sometimes they'll give you a little bit more perspective, a different angle. It's like, oh, yeah. Or sometimes go, it's more confusing. And again, that's just the nature of the study. The idea, though, that YHUH claimed to be the door to his father's house, the door by which the sheep are saved. That's a serious consideration, especially since he makes himself exclusive. Only if you enter through me do you get to my father's house. But then I have to say, what is his father's house? What does that mean? We'll get to that in a little bit. Let me back up and go back to the alphabetic sequence itself. So if I'm looking at Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, that's the first group of 7. So because 7 is a package and the 7th letter, Zayin, is to cut something off, then that keeps the first set of 7 in a package by itself. So I can say, well, the first 7 days of creation, that's one unit. The 7th letter, the day he rested, well, he didn't do anything that day. He didn't make anything. Elohim made the world, the universe, in the first 6 days. Well, he did make something the 7th day. He made the 7th day a day of rest, a day of non-work. He just didn't construct any objects on that day. So it was different. But still, there's a package of 7. There happens to be a package of 7 words in Genesis 1:1, Bereshit 1:1. It says Bereshit, that's literally translated in the beginning. Bara, that's the word created, Bet Resh Aleph. Elohim, that's the word translated God. And then there's this word ALEF-TAV. So the first letter means in. That's the letter Bet used as a prefix. And then you got Rosh, that's head. Pinnacle is also a foundation. Rashit, well, Shin Tav is also a foundation. So there's something foundational at the beginning, which is also a pinnacle. Bet Resh is Aleph is to create, but Bet Resh is pure and clean. Elohim, that's in reference in the plural. The Yod Mem Im is the plural suffix. as if there's more than one, or that's just the aggrandized, the majestic singularity. Possibly that's the way the language works. It doesn't have to mean plural in number. It's plural in regard, called the royal we, like a king saying, we will have this to eat. We, that's a reference of himself, is not the singular man, person eating, but the one who is referring to himself as more than a single person. That's called the royal we. So that could be one explanation of why Elohim is in the plural. Could be. Some people don't like that idea. You can like whatever you want. You can think whatever you want. I'm just giving context. But then there's this word. The fourth word is ALEF-TAV. And that word is all by itself. It's not hyphenated. Then it says Hashemayim, which is the heavens. Then the sixth word is Vav ALEF-TAV, Ve'et. In that case, it's three letters, Vav ALEF-TAV, and it's hyphenated with Ha'aretz, would be the earth. So that's taken as its own word, Vav ALEF-TAV, which is simply and, if Vav means and, ALEF-TAV. But ALEF-TAV is used there as a reference of, in that case, and the earth, the action of the verb, which is to create, Bet Resh Aleph, on the noun, which would be the earth. But when it's what they call a standalone ALEF-TAV, that's ALEF-TAV without a hyphen. That's ALEF-TAV all by itself. There's no other letters around it, and that's the fourth word in the DALET position of the package of 7 in Genesis 1:1. And the interesting thing about that word is that it's never translated. And so the sages, the great wise men of hundreds of years, the rabbis, the people who study the ancient text, from what I have heard, they don't know what ALEF-TAV means. They don't know why it's there. It's used a few thousand times, I think close to 7,000 times, I think was the number, throughout the Old Testament, all the way from Genesis to Malachi or Chronicles, or how, depending on which translation you're looking at. But the point is, it's that standalone ALEF-TAV is used a whole bunch of times, and nobody can quite say why it's there. The word ALEF-TAV, if you look in Klein's dictionary, basically can mean with. In the beginning created Elohim with the heavens and with the earth. See, that doesn't fit, so it can't mean with. Meaning with, the Red Dictionary or Klein's dictionary will also tell you it might mean a yoke. Well, ayin lamed is the word that means yoke. Ayin mem means people, but it's also translated as with, and ayin lamed is sometimes translated as with. That is a prefix letter, can mean with. Sheen is a prefix letter, can mean that which belongs to, which is a concept of with. Lamed is a prefix, like ani la dodi, I am belonging to my beloved. So lamed is kind of a with. Dalet is used pretty often in Aramaic as a prefix letter, having something to do in the capacity of. As a prefix letter, it means in the capacity of. But bet is a prefix letter, can mean in the condition of. And it's like, well, what's the difference? Is belonging to in the capacity of, or the condition of, or, and it's like, you'd have to discriminate the nuances in your own mind. I suppose some eloquent scholar could give you exact, minute definitions between those different letters and words, but there might be a fuzzy overlap, like an airbrush rendering where you have got, let's say, red here and blue here, but then this phases of purple in between, or black and white with gray gradient tones. It might work more like that. And again, one might look at this language and say, I want to know the rules. I want to see the strict lines between how they're separated. Well, maybe it doesn't work that way. Maybe it works with fuzzy lines. I think it's more like fuzzy lines between the things. And it's like, well, then there's a blending. How's anybody supposed to know? Well, I made this poster, and we talked about this last year sometime, called META, M-E-T-A. Well, then Facebook came up with Meta, so I changed the name to be, I call it the word of Yahweh or something. Anyway, what I'm saying is that it was that chart with the flames. It was kind of like about 3 feet tall and about a foot wide. But the word meta is a Greek word, kind of a prefix word that means in between or in the state of. So you get metamorphosis and metathesis. There was a whole bunch of words, and I noticed that each one of those words, meta, is translated in Webster's dictionary, seem to describe the space between, at least in my own mind, the space between the Hebrew alphabet letters. In other words, if Gimel was going to turn into Dalet, if I was going to read the alphabet sequence as Aleph becomes Bet, Bet becomes Gimel, Gimel becomes Dalet, Dalet becomes Hey, what does that mean that the one letter becomes something else? Well, if I look at mathematics, and I'm trying to show you a way of thinking, a way of my thinking, and somebody else can say, well, I don't care the way you think. And it's like, well, then don't. But I'm trying to tell you the way I'm thinking as terms of what I'm trying to express or describe the alphabet, how it seems to function. If I have in mathematics, if I have a singular 1, okay, that's pure and clean. That's simply 1. There's a single oneness about that letter 1. And 1 is even drawn as this straight, thin line. 1. Well, what's 2? Well, that's 2 is 2 ones. Okay, but if you look at the decimal system, everything is broken down into 10. So you have 1.1, and you add a little bit more, 1.2, a little bit more, 1.3. It's no longer 1. It's heading towards 2, but it's not 2 yet. So from 1.1 to 1.9 is a gradient of 1 becoming 2, but it's not 2 yet until there's fully 2 ones, and then it's 2. So that gradient between using decimal considerations of 1.1 to 1.9 is the meta. There's a word called titration, which is to say if you have a certain, let's say a liquid, so let's say it's clear, and you start putting certain drops in, and all of a sudden it reaches a saturation point where it changes color. That's the titration point. That's the tipping of the scales where something has happened that now it's this other thing. It's the same consideration. So when I say if Aleph becomes Bet or Bet becomes Gimel, there's this idea that if Aleph is a singularity, when does it become not a singularity, but become something else? Well, if you add 1.1, that's got to be betness. But if Bet is 2, then 1.1 is not Bet. So there's more going on. Well, there's this idea that Aleph is self-referential. Well, who's going to tell you that? You can't look in the dictionary and find that Aleph is self-referential, but I've seen that in translation, meaning a word, a verb that starts with Aleph is always translated that I am such and such, or I will, then there's a verb action. So by noticing the use of translation or how the great translators over the ages have rendered a word that starts with an aleph, they'll tell you that they all agree that it means the person who's doing the talking is referring to themselves with either identity or intent. So when Elohim, which starts with an aleph, says, I am that I am, that's Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, spelled Aleph Hey Yod Hey. Well, Hey Yod Hey is the verb to exist, or Hey Vav Hey, either one. Any word with Heys, Yods, and Vavs is always the verb to exist because it starts with an aleph. That means I am. But some translations don't say I am that I am. They'll say I will be what I will be, or I will be that I will be. But see, it's still I will. So, and the verb to exist is the other 3 letters. So the aleph there, and the word ani, aleph nun yod, means I am. The word anoki, aleph nun kaf yod, means I am. The word aleph tav yod is self-referential of me, starts with an aleph. So I gave you a number of cases where, okay, aleph is self-referential. though I didn't see that sentence, Aleph is self-referential in the dictionary. That's determined. Okay, so you or anybody can sit there and just start studying. Look at the way scripture's written to learn the language. As a matter of fact, back when America was at its, you might say, early colonial days, they used the King James Bible as a way to learn how to read. That was the textbook. And they also then started using it then to, you might say, orient one's consciousness. And when people say, well, America's a Christian country, what does that mean? I would say what that means is that the Christian ideology, which was, you might say, woven or expressed in the translation of the King James Bible as being a Christian paradigm, a Christian explanation, a Christian worldview, a Christian cosmological references that who are we, why are we doing here, and where is this all going? Because they're calling that Christian, then those who think along those lines got that from reading the Bible because it's built into it. So the idea is, if you want to learn Hebrew and you pick up a Hebrew Bible and say, well, where do you get one of them? Well, we're trying to get the Paleo version available. There are versions available that people have written in Paleo, different letter fonts, but you can go to a Jewish bookstore online or in person and get a Tanakh. I happen to use Stone's Tanakh, Tanakh being an acronym of Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketubim, which is the instructions, the writings. That's the Ketubim. Nevi'im would be the prophets. So it's TNK, Torah, which is instructions. Neva, that's Neva is prophet. Nevi'im is plural, and then Ketuba is to write. So Ketubim is writing. Just so you know, TNK, if you write it, is Tanakh. It's an acronym. But if you get it, you can see the Hebrew on one side and the English on the other. It's not an interlinear. You still have to figure out, with the use of a dictionary or an interlinear or looking online, what is that word and how's it translated in English? So as I was saying, that in the beginning, God created. No, in Hebrew, it's in the beginning created God or gods. So they've flopped the words around, changing places. So you have to deal with all that. Okay, let's go back to the first 7 letters in Genesis 1:1. One thing I can do, because there's 7 words and 7 letters in Genesis 1:1, is I can just line them up and say, in the beginning, that's in the Aleph position. Created, that's in the Bet position. Elohim, Gimel. ALEF-TAV, DALET. Hey, what do you know? ALEF-TAV is the DALET position. Is there a mystery that's woven into that? Why would the DALET be in the ALEF-TAV in the DALET position, or the DALET in the ALEF-TAV position, whichever one you want to give, I'd say, priority to? Is that coincidence, or is that like, how about that? What's going on there? Why is that DALET in the position of the ALEF-TAV? You say, it doesn't matter. Because no English translation has the ALEF-TAV replaced, that Hebrew word replaced by an English word. It's just, they leave it blank. You wouldn't even know that there's an ALEF-TAV there. So it's a great mystery. And the mystery's hidden. The mystery's closed up. So now, if Yeshua says, I'm the door, what does he mean by that? Now, in my thinking as a Christian mind, I could say, okay, what that means is I have to believe in Jesus and ask Jesus to let me into the Father's house, or ask Jesus to save me. If he says, I'm the door, whoever enters through me is saved, okay? Well, how do you do that? Now I need more doctrine. Now I need to say, what does he mean to enter through him? Nicodemus said in John chapter 3, where he's having that conversation at night, on the sly, you might say, not in the public eye, but he says something about Yeshua has said about a man having to be born again. And Nicodemus is like, what? The man got to enter into his mother again? It's like, come on, man, that's gross. Shut up. I don't even want to picture that. And it's like, wait a minute. What if Nicodemus was saying, are you telling me I need to be reincarnated, born a second time through a mother's womb? Is that what you're saying? Are you, Yeshua, trying to tell us that reincarnation is a real thing? But see, I never heard anybody tell me he was talking about reincarnation. It was just some kind of weirdo talking about coming out of his mother's uterus. What? Crazy, stupid nonsense that you can't wrap your mind around. Well, see, when you're left with doctrine, when you're left with spin, when you're left with hundreds of years, if not 2,000 years now, of people mucking around with the words, believe whatever you want to believe, but you may not be right. So the question about this whole study is, what did Elohim say? What does that mean? And now what am I supposed to do with that? Now, if I go back and say, well, Yeshua is Elohim, Jesus is God. Is that true? Well, then I have to look closer and say, even in the English, I can't find anywhere where Jesus claimed to be God. And I'm not trying to make doctrinal statements that somebody can say, yes, we're gonna believe like that. What I'm saying is that I, as just some random normal person who was taught to read the Bible, and I was given 50 years of various doctrines from various denominations, a bunch of books, listening to songs, all kinds of input. I know songs claim that Jesus Christ is God, but I can't find in the translation of the Bible where Jesus Christ claimed to be God, or even the Son of God. What he said is he called himself, self-referential, of calling himself the Son of Man, which would be Ben Adam, Ben meaning son, Adam meaning man. He referred to himself almost in the third person, saying the Son of Man this or the Son of Man that. And it's like, he didn't say I'm the Son of God, nor did he ever say that I can see. He says, I am your God. Worship me. But what Yeshua did say was, he referred to my Father and your Father, my Elohim and your Elohim. Well, he's pointing to his Father. He also said, when he was asked about the end of the world and when all these things come about, he says, I don't even know, but my Father, only he knows. And it's like, well, if he is the Father, then why doesn't he know? Well, there's a separation. Well, wait a minute. If there's a separation, how does that work? If he and the Father are the same one, there's no separation. One is a singularity. Two is two separate ones. Well, then you get the Trinity. Okay, you got to believe in the Trinity in order to be saved. No, wait a minute. Could you explain that rationally so I can understand the Trinity? No, it's not rational. It's an irrational concept, like in mathematics, there's an irrational number, the chiefest of which is the square root of -1. Doesn't exist. It's what they call an imaginary concept. Drawn in mathematics is not a number, but the numeral, call it a numeral, it's the lowercase letter I, a little line with a dot, whereas the number 1 is a big line. And it's like the square root of -1. Well, you can't multiply two numbers together and get a negative number. In mathematics, it doesn't work that way. You can't do it. Well, but the concept exists that you can, though our human mind can't process that. Okay, well then, so it exists as an imaginary number, the square root of -1. So what I have heard from people who were theologians is that the Trinity is such a thing. It's an imaginary concept which you cannot define. But if it's required that you believe in the Trinity in order to be saved, does that mean only the mentally, intellectually astute, those who can do great cerebral gymnastics, are allowed to be saved? No, it's not by works. It's by grace, lest any man should boast. That's another doctrine. And it's like, well, then how does this thing work? If Jesus said it's got to be through me that a man is saved, then is he like the mother? You got to be born through the mother. You got to be born by believing through him. You see, well, a door, I can open the door and walk through. That's practical. If he claims to be the door to his Father's house and the door of salvation, that's a practical consideration. Everything else becomes esoteric. See, exoteric means obvious, means like there's the door, that's practical, it's obvious, it's clear. But esoteric means invisible, unknowable, only secret information that only those that are told, only those that are part of the inner circle with special elite information, only those guys know. So is he trying to be some esoteric guru? Or is he saying pretty simple, I'm the door. The sheep enter through me are saved. Why make it a mystery? Why make it so convoluted that I need 2,000 years of priests and prophets and apostles and ecumenical councils to give me access? And then the Jewish rabbis say that's all bogus. In fact, the Jewish rabbis say they're the only authorized intellectuals who are allowed to make up doctrines or declare what a doctrine truly is. And yet then the church says, no, you guys are a bunch of bozos. Word bozo in Hebrew means derided, scorned, mocked, ridiculed, disgraced. And only the church gets to declare what something is. And I've even heard the Catholic radio say, tradition is the church's bailiwick. My words for what they said. They are allowed to, they're supposed to determine what the church does. The church tradition is verbalized, established, and declared and becomes the reality because they said so. That's the way it works. Well, is that true or not? I happen to not think that's true, but they declare it's true, so that makes me a heretic, an infidel in their estimation. And it's like, where do you find the truth? Where do you find the truth of anything ever? Well, there's something about this ALEF-BEIT. So as a riddle, look at John 1:1. King James, or the English translation, in the beginning was the Word. Doesn't say in the beginning was God, it says in the beginning was the Word. Well, what's that mean? Well, see, if you study the ALEF-BEIT, if you look at the meanings of the letters, the letter bet means house. The word means house, bet. Is it bet yod-tav, or the word bat, bet tav, or bata, means daughter, or village, or one deserving of, or one that's under the shadow, like a village doesn't have its own government, it's under the shadow of a neighboring city, like part of a county, perhaps, concept. Okay, so a daughter is still under her father's covering. Is that the word house? But see, bet is in reference to somebody else, something else as a more authority over the betness. But if Aleph is self-referential, but the word Bereshit starts with bet. So I can say, well, the bet of Bereshit in is a reference to under the shadow of the maker, the authority, the Elohim, starting with the letter Aleph, like that I think of other English words that start with A, administrator, author, artist. So if the Aleph, and Aleph is a silent letter, so Aleph expresses itself in what it makes, just trying to put things together, Sephering, connecting the dots. So if the Aleph is the letter that's not the first letter, it's referred to. So what we do is we see that, hey, here's creation. Who put it here? When I say the silent Aleph, the Aleph that doesn't have a vocalization, but it vocalizes itself by default, kind of as kind of the sound of a vowel, but it's just more like just a noise. There's the sound of Aleph, which is otherwise silent, but it expresses itself in the other letters. Just like, who's Elohim? He's the guy that made this place. Whoever, whatever, however many there is, Elohim by definition is the one who is responsible for this existing universe. And then when you read the verse in the Bible that says, the heavens declare the glory of Elohim. Oh, okay. Look at nature. See, just beautiful. He's the guy that's made all this stuff. That's Elohim. Well, yeah, but what does he want? Why are we here? Well, if he's the guy who wrote the ALEF-BEIT, see, if he's the Aleph who made this betness, then I could say in the beginning was the word. What word? Well, that's a riddle. And as we've discussed before, that if you think about it, well, the word itself, whatever it was that he likened himself to, the word was with Elohim, that's a bet prefix, and it was Elohim, that's the isness. So he said this word is the betness of Elohim with, and it is Elohim, well, that's Aleph. So the word itself is bet Aleph of Elohim. Well, the word spelled bet Aleph in Hebrew means to enter, to import, to arrive. So the arrival of this word being synchronized with Elohim. And one guy was saying how, I don't remember the details, who knows the Greek, said, if you look at the Greek for that word, it's different than in English. But I'm looking at the Hebrew of the word, and I can see bet Aleph, which means to arrive or import, coming in, incoming. So somehow it says, in the very beginning came this word, which was so associated with Elohim that he was okay with that. He didn't find it to be a distraction or a removal, a distortion, or somehow other. It was virtually synonymous, which is the word achad, unity. Not that the word is the Father, though it says that in English. It's unified and not discrepant from Elohim, that we might call Father. And then this word was used as a vehicle or a vessel, of mechanism by which the entire universe was made. And then that word itself became flesh, which is to say, became part of the corporeal universe, matter, Adam, and was given the name Jesus Christ or Yahusha. And then so you say, well, yeah, but what was the word? Well, Jesus. No, that was the name, the English name given to the Jewish guy who was the word made flesh. What itself was the word. Well, if it goes back to say, well, I believe the bottom line of it all is that it's the Hebrew ALEF-BEIT. Okay, so if the Hebrew ALEF-BEIT is that original word, which became the Adam, the what we might call a human being, that named Yahusha, or we might call him Jesus Christ. And then the question is, what's the difference there? That's another part of the story. But if the word became that guy speaking in John 10 or John 15, and he says, I'm the door, does he mean the man? Does he mean the ideology? Does it mean the iconic archetype figurehead of the Christian church? Or is he referring to the word? If that word is the door, the portal, the access provided to the Father, to salvation, then I've got to define what is that DALET of the ALEF-BEIT Gimel DALET, Hey Vav Zion. What is that ALEF-TAV? So what I'm saying is, no other Christian theologian or Jewish rabbi might go here, or maybe they all do. I don't know. I have to think for myself. And so for me to say, well, if one untranslated word is ALEF-TAV in the DALET position, and he claims to be the DALET, he might be referring to himself as that ALEF-TAV. And if I think of the ALEF-TAV as the first letter and the last letter, the beginning and the end, Alpha and Omega, of the whole alphabet. And if that's the Jesus guy, the JC, the Yeshua or Yahusha, or even some people might say Yahushua, where we get the name Joshua, but there's no letter J, so it can't be JC, it can't be Jesus Christ, it can't be Joshua, Yahusha, more likely. But nevertheless, the point is, if that's just the name of the dude, why do I call him a dude? What does that mean? Well, when Yahuwah, the voice of Elohim, says, "This is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased," listen to him. I think they said it at the Transfiguration and also at the baptism, if I recall correctly, but the son of David. Well, David is Dalet Vav Dalet, or perhaps Dalet Vav Yod Dalet. There might be a Yod plugged in, maybe not. And that's pronounced Dude or Dawood. Daoud. So he was Ben Dude or Ben Dodi, my beloved. Beloved is Dude or Dode. My beloved is Dodi. So this is my beloved. Ben is son. So my beloved son, Ben Dodi. But beloved is also David. So he's the son of David. So if somebody hears this is Ben Dodi, it's like, is that son of David or is this my beloved son? It's both. In Hebrew, it's both. Well, if Yahweh says, this is my beloved son, what's a son? S-O-N. Well, that means he begat him. That he was his only begotten son. But son is bet noon. To construct is bet noon hey. Like to be in the construction trades, building a house. To understand is bet yod noon. Or bet yod noon hey, bina. So to ponder the language, it's like, well, he's the construct. He's the construct form. See, Aleph has no form. Aleph has no vocalization. Aleph is just the existing consciousness. Once it gets expressed, or I can call it something like father, like creator, I'm rendering it into a bet format by saying, I can step aside and look at it and give it a label. That's what Adam's first job was. He was supposed to shomer the garden, but then he was also supposed to label or name. The word name is also shem, which is also position, here or there. He was told to name the animals. And if you think about it, every word in language is a description of what something is. Tree, grass, the color red. The word is, the word to, the word the, everything is like a label of something. And so as you build your vocabulary, you're just building labels. Adam's job was to put labels on his environment. And we're still doing it. Every word is simply labeling a perspective, an object, an action, an aspect, like an adjective or an adverb. That's what language is. But the word shiach, shin yod het, is the way it's spelled. Mem, shin yod het, the letter mem is a prefix, means the time, the place, the object, the one who. It takes something which doesn't have substance and it makes it of substance regard. So the simple example is gimel noon is the word garden. A garden is something you guard and protect. So mogen, mem gimel noon, is a shield, which is an object which does the protecting, or it's a verb action which does the protecting. Like a fence is an aspect of is a possible form of a mogen, magen, mem gimel noon. So the act of sitting there and realizing each letter is simply something else in life that we're giving a label to. Well, what's Aleph? Aleph is self-referential of having consciousness. Okay, what's Bet? Environment, house, the universe, the earth, under the sky, body. A body would be a Bet. What's Gimel? The Bet in motion, a verb, action, moving, transporting, moving around. Well, that's once you start moving, what's the first thing you got to do? Make a decision of where you're going. So DALET's the decision. Well, DALET's a door. Well, how do I know what I'm going to do? Well, you have to identify why you should make a decision. Well, that's hey. Hey is identifying the DALET of the Gimel, of the Bet, of the Aleph. So see, if I think of each letter as the next step in a progression of a logical sequence of I'm just living. I, that's me, that's Aleph. Am, that's my existing, that's my betness. I am living, well, that's my gimmeling. I'm here moving around. And so DALET, I get to decide, determine, do. See, those are all D words. I'm doing something. What am I going to do? That's the hey. Well, if I choose what I'm going to do, or I think about what I'm going to do, that's hey. That's like shining a light on something, on the decision, the D, the DALETing that I'm trying to do. And then if I actually connect, that's the Vav. The Vav is the connector, but the Zion is to disconnect. So if I was going to say, go to the store, if I said, hey, I'm just here and, I could use something to drink. I'm going to go to the store and get a glass of water, say, or I'm going to go over to the spring, the well, and get some water. So I make a decision, DALET, and then I have to say, well, how am I going to do that? So hey is the gathering of information. It's like, well, there's the well right over there. I'm just going to walk over there. No, that's polluted. I'm going to buy a bottle of water from the store over here. Oh, wait a minute, maybe that's polluted, and I should go to. Hey is information of trying to figure, and then Vav is like, now I'm going to actually connect. I'm walking, I'm driving, I'm getting there, and once I get there, I stop Vaving. That's Zion, because I'm at the place. That's the chet, the fence. I'm now at the store. I'm now at the objective. So if I live my life and then suddenly come to the end of my life, Zion, where I'm cut off, and then I face eternity, the great unknown, the letter chet, the eighth letter, which if you take the Arabic numeral 8 and draw it as what they call figure 8, Mobius strip concept of this infinite other realm that we don't know anything about. It's behind a veil. That's the chet. So if I can get in my mind, well, there's this pretty simple sequence of the first 7 letters. I'm going to take that first 7-letter thing and plug it into the first 7 days of creation. And I'm also going to plug it in the Mishkan pattern, which is actually composed of 11 letters. We'll talk about that later. But the first 7 letters establishes this rhythm of identification of what each of the phases is. And if they blend one into the next, I'm saying, what does Aleph have to do to become Bet? The self has to take on a physical identity, time and place, in, on, with, among, through, or against. So if I can't define Aleph, then something which is just ethereal consciousness is Alephness. Soon as I can identify it, it's now Betness. And if the Bet starts moving, that's Gimel. And as it starts moving, where is it moving, or why is it moving? That's DALET. Well, if I plug DALET into ALEF-TAV, then I could say the information within Aleph and Tav, or between Aleph and Tav. What is the information? Well, that's the hey, because hey is information. But DALET means a door, which means I have an option. If Gimel is the tether, the nexus, the link between Aleph and Bet, like we mentioned last week, if Aleph is the mouth and Bet's the stomach, the Gimel is the throat in between. If this city is an Aleph and that city is a Bet, and the highway in between that the Freightliner truck drives back and forth, shuttling resources, that's the Gimeling, the camel, Gimel, camel. What's the DALET? But if the DALET is, you have a decision whether you're going to or not. And if it's in direct reference to the Gimel, then I could say, which is a direct reference to the Bet, then we as individual Alephs could say, I realize I'm separated from the Bet of Aleph, from the house of Abba, Elohim. Why? Because that's how we were made. We were made to be Adam, given autonomy. And then we get to choose, decide, do I want to be of my father's house or independent agent? If I want to be totally on my own, having nothing to do with Elohim's rule, jurisdiction, ways, which is house. See, the word Aleph means to be taught, trained, and domesticated of the house. The word Bet means same thing. And I can determine whether I want to be with or against. So if he gave me the right or the responsibility to determine for myself to be of or not of, that's the Dalet presented to the Gimel situation of being Bet. Do you want to blend with Aleph? But blend that's the Echad. So when I see Yeshua saying, I only say the things I hear my father saying, he's being Echad. He isn't being his father. He's being Bet of his father. I only do the things I see him doing. That's the same consideration. So I can use that as a model to give definition to what's Aleph compared to Bet. What's Aleph compared to Bet? The Gimeling is to say that there's this Dalet that, hey, we're given words of advice that we could then connect or disconnect. That's going through the first 6 letters. Then when I read where Moshe says, I put before you life and death, blessing and cursing. I suggest you choose life. That's the decision. Blessing or cursing, life or death. That's that. If Zion is to be cut off, that's death. We all have to die. Then I can look at Het as being the grave. I can look at Het as being the kingdom of heaven. I can look at Het as being a prison. I can look at Het as being a palace. Het's this fortress. You just start building in all these other complications, and if somebody says, oh, I don't want to do that, well, just look at the pictures. You can simplify it as much as you want, but this stuff is still there to look at. There's that phrase, can't see the forest for the trees. The trees in the way. Where's the forest? The forest is the collection of trees. It's all just how you look at the same stuff. If I go back to the sequence again, then, if Hey is expressing something about the Dalet, it's illuminating, it's clarifying, it's revealing, but see, then Hey is going to be itself defined by the next 2 letters following it, Vav and Zion. Here's what the Dalet is. Hey is pointing at the Dalet. You get to either connect or disconnect. Vav or Zion. That's one way to read Vav Zion. I can look at the man slain as Vav being the number 6, the masculine suffix, Zion put to the weapon, because the word Zion means to be put to the weapon. It means a few other things too. We'll get into that in a couple of weeks. But what I'm saying is, Hey is referring to the Dalet, which is before it, about the stuff that comes after it. So each letter can be seen as in sequence. So Dalet is in reference to the Gimel. But I've also noticed, if this in pondering, that each 3rd letter can be dropped in between the other 2. So what's the relationship between Aleph and Bet? The Gimel. If Aleph is the mouth and Bet's the stomach, Gimel is the throat in between. But what's the relationship between Bet and Gimel? The Dalet. Well, what does that mean? If Bet means otherness and Gimel is a tether, what's Dalet? You can choose to be tethered or not. You're given a choice. You get to decide. The word Din, Dalet Nun, or Dan, or Dalet Yod Nun, Dina, means to judge or decide. Or you're the referee who makes the determination. Is this a fair play or foul play? So even in Hebrew, looking at the words that start with those letters, if you think about it, you'll find some kind of connection. So if I looked at, like we talked about last week, that the Gimel, the relationship between who am I and what is my father? My father's throne is founded on Mishpat. What is Mishpat? What you do comes back on you. What goes around comes around. That's this link. That's the back and forth. So you could say, well, Yeshua said, I only do the things I see my Father doing. I only say what I hear him saying. Hey, guess what? If we want to be just as successful as Yeshua, let's do the same thing. Let's say what we hear our Father saying. But he wasn't speaking English or Greek. He was speaking Hebrew. So I considered DALET noon, I'm going to make the determination for myself that I should learn his language, both to speak it, to hear it, to read it, to engage what it means. But am I saying that you got to know Hebrew else you're going to burn in hell? No, I didn't say those words. But for Yeshua to say, nobody enters the Father's house except through me, which Christian doctrine is he referring to? Catholic? Greek Orthodox? Baptist, Protestant, Lutheran, Methodist, Evangelical, Fundamental, Charismatic, Pentecostal? 50,000 variations, maybe 80,000 variations of Protestant twists and turns. Which one is the proper door? Some really disturbing things on the internet. The Ephesians 6:15 talks about the feet shod with the gospel of priests. See, having their feet shod with the gospel of peace means the Christian's ready for spiritual warfare and evangelism. Is that what it means? That's what they say it means. Is that what it means? There's a 2 Corinthians, was it 3:6 maybe? Gets into another detail. But anyway, it says, the administration of death in letters. Paul was talking to the Corinthians about if the administration of death in letters is given a certain regard, then how much more so the administration of life by the Spirit. And this one site was saying the ministration of death was Israel's civil administration for punishing violations of civil law. Really? I don't think that's what that verse says, or I don't think it's what it means. There's another place that says, Paul in 2 Corinthians 3, Paul is saying nobody can keep the law of Moses because of innate depravity or inescapable sin. Another thing said, I was just looking at stuff on the internet, it says the death-dealing letter, the letter of the old covenant kills. So somebody might look at that and say, to study these Paleo-Hebrew letters is pretty macabre. In English, that's spelled M-A-C-A-B-R-E, macabre. But put Hebrew letters that mem, kaf, kuf bet resh, I think is the word. It means a grave, a place of rotting flesh of a dead person. The letters. Well, see, I have a whole different translation of that verse. And I tell the story that I was in Israel one time, and there's a barbed wire fence, and it said, warning, do not cross this fence. It was written in Hebrew, I believe. Don't cross this fence because there's landmines. It's probably written in English too, but all of a sudden I realized you could step over the fence. It wasn't that very big of a fence, but it was just this whole hillside. If that sign was written in letters telling me where death was, if I stepped over this line, that's the realm of death, and one of these landmines could blow up. That's administering, because the word in Greek, diakonos, there in 2 Corinthians, diakonos is where you get the word deacon. It's like a hostess or a waitress or somebody comes and facilitates, or like a nurse. It facilitates telling me where death is. But you see, every other translation is a spin based on the doctrine of hating the words and letters. And so they're going to make the reader think that the words and letters are detestable. But what I think Paul was really saying is the words and letters tell you where death is. The Spirit tells you where the life is. Well, the words and letters tell you where life is also. If you can see it, if you want to see it. So what I found is that the English translation pushes the reader to have an attitude of disdain for what Yahweh said and what he means. Well, I think that itself is pretty corrupt, pretty foul. So the idea of going back to the words, to the letters, the 22 independent individual letters written in a chronological sequence coded to the Mishkan pattern, and then becoming Yahusha, the man, the Adam, who walked out the chronological narrative in sequence order, which would be the gospel narrative story, to say that, that's the door to Elohim's, to be taught, trained, and domesticated, to be of the house of his father. And through that correlation of being with, of the heart, to find salvation, to find entrance. But then what does it all mean? How do you do that? Does that mean you have to know Hebrew to be saved? No, didn't say those words. But that becomes the great mystery. The greatest mystery in life then is, how do I do that thing he was referring to when he says, I'm the Dalet, and you don't get into my Father's house and you don't get saved. If you're the sheep, you do not get saved unless you come through me. Is he talking about the man? Is he talking about the iconic archetype, the paradigm of Christian doctrine in all its permutations? Or is he talking about what is referred to by the ALEF-TAV somehow being this Dalet of the house, the teaching, the understanding of Abba's essence? We're at a place of a break. We should take a break here.